Welcome to this journey through one of the most unsettling cases recorded in the history of Salem. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching from and the exact time at which you are listening to this narration. We are interested to know to what places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the autumn of 1912, while most of Salem was preparing for the upcoming holiday season, the local police received an unusual report. The postman who delivered mail to the northern outskirts of the town had noticed something peculiar at the town residence. For 27 consecutive days, newspapers and parcels had accumulated on the porch of the stately Victorian home on Willow Street. Despite this, every morning at precisely 7:30, the lace curtains in the second-floor window would move as if someone was peering out. The officer assigned to investigate was Thomas Jennings, a 38-year veteran of the Salem Police Department. What he discovered that December morning would eventually uncover one of the most disturbing cases in the town's history, a history already heavy with darkness. The town residence stood at the end of a tree-lined avenue set back from the road and partially obscured by overgrown elm trees. Built in 1873 by cotton merchant Elias Towne, the house had remained in the family for generations. At the time of the investigation, it was occupied by the two remaining Towne sisters, Evelyn, 59, and Eleanor, 57. Officer Jennings reported that, upon approaching the house, he detected a peculiar odor emanating from the property, not the smell of decay one might expect from a potential death, but rather a cloying sweetness mingled with chemicals that reminded him of the local photography studio. The windows, though intact, were covered with a thin layer of grime that gave them an almost opaque quality. The flower beds, once meticulously maintained according to town records, had long been overtaken by weeds and wild undergrowth. After receiving no answer to his knocks, Jennings used his authority to enter the premises. The front door was unlocked but difficult to open, as if something was obstructing it from within. When he finally managed to push it open, he found himself in a foyer that appeared frozen in time. The furnishings were of excellent quality, but covered in a layer of dust, suggesting neglect despite the house being actively inhabited. What struck Officer Jennings most profoundly, according to his report, was the absence of footprints in the dust that covered the parquet flooring, except for a single perfectly maintained pathway leading from the entrance to the main staircase, and another to what appeared to be the dining room. It was as if, Jennings wrote in his official statement, the inhabitants moved only along predetermined routes, never deviating an inch to the left or right. The Towne sisters had always been fixtures of Salem's upper society, though they were known for their eccentricities. After the death of their parents in the late 1880s, the sisters withdrew from social life gradually until, by 1900, they were rarely seen outside their home. According to municipal records, they maintained minimal contact with the outside world through correspondence and weekly deliveries from local merchants. Eleanor, the younger sister, had briefly attended a prestigious women's college in Boston before returning home abruptly during her second year. No explanation was ever given for her sudden departure from education. Evelyn, the elder, had never married, despite having been considered one of the more eligible young women in Salem during her youth. Town records indicate she had been engaged to a Boston physician in 1881, but the engagement ended mysteriously. Local gossip, documented in the personal journal of Margaret Holcomb, a neighbor, suggested that Evelyn had broken the engagement after discovering her fiancé's involvement in what were termed questionable medical practices. No further details were provided, and the matter was never publicly discussed. The dining room, where Officer Jennings followed the dust-free path, presented the first truly disturbing element of the case. The long mahogany table was set for dinner, not for two, as one might expect for the sisters, but for 12. Each place setting was immaculate, fine china, crystal glassware, and sterling silver utensils arranged with precision. At each place was a name card written in elegant calligraphy. The names included those of the sisters, but also 10 others, some recognizable as former Salem residents who had either moved away or passed away years earlier. One name in particular caught Officer Jennings's attention, Dr. Calvin Whitmore, Evelyn's former fiancé, who according to Boston records had died in 1905. What made this tableau particularly unsettling was not merely its existence, but its condition. Unlike the rest of the dust-covered house, the dining table appeared to have been cleaned recently. The plates contained traces of food that had not yet fully dried or decayed, suggesting the dinner party had occurred within the past day or two. Most disturbing of all, according to Jennings' report, was that each glass contained varying amounts of what appeared to be wine, except for Dr. Us. Whitmore's glass, which contained a cloudy liquid that Jennings initially mistook for water, but noted had a strong chemical odor. Proceeding further into the house, Officer Jennings followed another clean path that led to a locked door beneath the main staircase. After several attempts to locate the key, he forced the door open, revealing a narrow staircase leading to the basement. The air that escaped when the door was opened was described as stifling and chemical-laden, causing an immediate burning sensation in the throat and eyes. The basement of the Towne residence had been converted into what can only be described as a peculiar workshop. A large table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by shelves containing hundreds of glass bottles filled with chemicals, many of which were labeled with symbols rather than words. Photography equipment, cameras, developing trays, specialized lamps, was arranged meticulously along one wall. But it was the far corner of the basement that contained the element that would transform this from a case of eccentric recluses into something far more sinister. A large cabinet, similar to those used by physicians to store specimens, held 12 glass containers. 11 of these containers held what appeared to be preserved human hair, each labeled with a name corresponding to one of the name cards on the dining table upstairs. The 12th container, labeled with Dr. Whitmore's name, contained something else entirely. According to Jennings's official report, portions of which were later redacted from public records, this container held unidentified material sealed for further examination. Upon this discovery, Officer Jennings immediately called for backup, and a more thorough investigation of the premises began. It was during this expanded search that authorities finally located the Towne sisters. Evelyn and Eleanor were found in the master bedroom on the second floor, seated in matching chairs facing the window that overlooked Willow Street, the same window where the curtains had been seen moving each morning. Both women were alive, but in a state described by the examining physician as catatonic detachment. They acknowledged neither the officer's presence nor each other's, staring fixedly out the window as if waiting for someone to arrive. The room itself was immaculately maintained, unlike most of the house. The four-poster bed was made with clean linens, and fresh flowers, despite the winter season, sat in a vase on the dresser. A logbook lay open on a small writing desk, with entries dating back 30 years, each detailing what appeared to be dinner parties with the same 12 guests. The most recent entry, dated just 2 days before Officer Jennings' investigation, contained only a brief note. The doctor has finally agreed to the procedure. The others will follow. The initial medical examination of the sisters revealed them to be severely malnourished, but without any obvious injuries or signs of physical trauma. They responded to basic commands, but did not speak. When shown the guest list from the dining room, both women displayed the only emotional reaction witnessed during the entire initial investigation. They smiled. In the days that followed, authorities attempted to piece together what had occurred in the Towne residence. The chemicals in the basement were identified by a specialist from Boston as substances commonly used in both photography and embalming. Several of the more unusual compounds were determined to be experimental preservatives, not in common usage. The Municipal Records Office revealed that of the 10 dinner guests beyond the sisters, 8 were confirmed deceased, with dates of death ranging from 1897 to 1911. The remaining 2 had moved away from Salem decades earlier, yet according to post office records, each received regular correspondence from the Towne address until just months before the investigation. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery of a series of photographs found in a hidden compartment in Eleanor's writing desk. These images, taken over what appeared to be many years, showed the dining room table set for 12, but with varying numbers of empty chairs in each successive photograph. The final image, dated November 1912, showed only 2 empty chairs. The photographs were accompanied by notes in Eleanor's handwriting, detailing a process she referred to as preservation of essence. The technical aspects of her writings suggested knowledge far beyond what would be expected of someone without formal scientific training, leading investigators to suspect that the sisters had been guided in their activities by someone with expertise in chemistry and possibly medicine. Attention naturally turned to Dr. Calvin Whitmore, Evelyn's former fiancé. According to records obtained from Boston, Dr. Whitmore had indeed been a practicing physician until his license was revoked in 1898 for unspecified ethical violations. After losing his medical license, he had apparently continued to conduct private research, though the nature of this research was not documented in any official capacity. His death in 1905 had been ruled under disputed circumstances, with references to a toxic compound found during the investigation. This detail seemed to connect with Officer Jennings' observation of the unusual liquid in Dr. Whitmore's glass at the Towne residence. The investigation might have ended there, with the sisters being committed to the state asylum, had it not been for the arrival of a package at the Salem police station 1 week after their discovery. The package, postmarked from Boston 3 days before the initial investigation, was addressed to Eleanor Towne, but had been rerouted due to the circumstances. When opened by authorities, the package was found to contain a journal written by Dr. Whitmore, spanning the years from his engagement to Evelyn Towne until just before his reported death. The contents of this journal cast the entire case in a new and more disturbing light. According to Dr. Whitmore's writings, his engagement to Evelyn had ended not because of his questionable medical practices, as town gossip suggested, but because of hers. Evelyn, it seemed, had developed an obsessive interest in what Whitmore described as the conservation of human essence, a pseudo-scientific concept that proposed the possibility of preserving not just the body but the consciousness of an individual after death. Whitmore wrote that he had initially indulged what he believed to be merely an eccentric intellectual interest, sharing his medical knowledge with Evelyn. It was only when he discovered that she had been conducting experiments on small animals in the basement of the Towne residence that he became alarmed and broke the engagement. The journal detailed how, years later, a desperate and financially ruined Whitmore had reconnected with Evelyn, who offered him financial support in exchange for his assistance with her ongoing research. Despite his initial ethical qualms, Whitmore's journal revealed that he had indeed provided the sisters with knowledge and chemicals necessary for their work, though he claimed to have believed they were using these materials only for advanced photographic processes. The final entries in Whitmore's journal took on an increasingly paranoid tone. He wrote of suspecting that he had been gradually affected by unknown substances during his visits to the Towne residence, describing a progressive deterioration in his health. His last entry, dated just 2 weeks before his reported death, expressed his intention to confront the sisters about his suspicions. The implication, though never stated explicitly in any official report, was that Dr. Whitmore's death may not have been self-inflicted, and that the sisters had continued to set a place for him at their table in the years since his passing, perhaps believing they had preserved some essential part of him through their disturbing practices. The question that plagued investigators was whether the sisters had been involved in more than just the collection of mementos from the deceased. The unusual materials discovered in the specimen jar, labeled with Dr. Whitmore's name, raised unsettling questions about the true nature of the sisters' activities. The case took yet another turn When authorities, acting on information found in Eleanor's notes, reviewed historical burial records of 3 individuals named on the dinner guest list. According to confidential documents, the records revealed unexplained anomalies that troubled investigators but were deemed inconclusive. As winter deepened in Salem, so too did the mystery of the Towne sisters. Neither woman ever spoke again, remaining in their catatonic state despite efforts by various physicians to reach them. They were eventually transferred to a private sanatorium outside of Boston, where they were kept under constant supervision. In a strange postscript to the case, the attendant assigned to their care reported that each night, precisely at 7 o'clock, both women would suddenly become animated, pantomiming the actions of serving dinner and engaging in conversation with empty chairs arranged around their room. 12 chairs, to be exact. The Towne residence remained vacant for years afterward, its contents catalogued and stored as evidence. The chemicals and equipment from the basement were destroyed under judicial order. The specimen jars and their contents were sealed in a secure location. The photographs and writings of the sisters were sealed by court order, accessible only to official investigators. In 1914, a fire of unknown origin destroyed the house completely, leaving nothing but charred remains that were quickly cleared away. The property remained undeveloped, with prospective buyers invariably withdrawing their interest after visiting the site. Local residents reported that for years afterward, on certain nights, particularly in the autumn, the faint smell of chemical preservatives and the cloying sweetness of decay could be detected in the area where the house once stood. Some claimed to hear the delicate clinking of fine crystal and the murmur of dinner-time conversation emanating from the empty lot. Eleanor Towne passed away in the sanatorium in early 1915, with Evelyn following just 3 days later. According to the sanatorium records, both women died in their sleep, with expressions described by the attending physician as peaceful, almost expectant. They were buried in the Towne family plot in Salem, their graves marked with a single shared headstone bearing only their names and the dates of their births and deaths. No epitaph was added, as there were no remaining family members to commission one. What drove the Towne sisters to their macabre obsession remains a matter of conjecture. Some have suggested that intense grief over lost loved ones triggered a shared psychosis. Others point to the isolated nature of their upbringing and the limited roles available to women of their era and social standing as contributing factors to their psychological deterioration. The most unsettling theory proposed by a researcher who examined the case in 1950 was that the sisters may have been exposed to mercury compounds commonly used in photography during that era, leading to progressive neurological damage and paranoid delusions. This theory, however, fails to account for the methodical and precise nature of their activities over such an extended period. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in Eleanor's cryptic notes about the preservation of essence. In one particularly lucid passage, she wrote, "Death is merely an inconvenience of physics. The essential nature remains, requiring only the proper vessel and invitation to return to the table." Whether the Towne sisters were simply delusional or had stumbled upon some terrible knowledge best left undiscovered, their story serves as a grim reminder of how isolation and obsession can transform even the most refined minds into something unrecognizable. What the official reports fail to mention is that the Towne sisters' obsession with preserving their dinner guests began long before Dr. Whitmore's involvement. According to personal correspondence found in a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards of Evelyn's bedroom, correspondence not included in the official case files, the sisters' fascination with the boundaries between life and death began in 1880, when their mother fell gravely ill. A journal kept by their father, Elias Towne, detailed how both daughters maintained a constant vigil by their mother's bedside, refusing to accept the physician's prognosis that she had only days to live. Entries describe how Evelyn, then 27, began consulting obscure medical texts and corresponding with researchers in Europe who were exploring experimental preservation techniques. One particularly telling entry reads, "E. has become consumed with the notion that consciousness resides not in the brain, as is commonly believed, but in the essence of the person. She speaks endlessly of ancient Egyptian practices and shows me translations of papyri describing how ancient peoples believed certain elements were essential for the afterlife journey. According to Towne records, their mother, Mary Ann Towne, succumbed to her illness in December of 1880. What the public record does not show, but what is revealed in Elias Towne's private journal, is that the daughters insisted on preparing their mother's body themselves, dismissing the services of the local undertaker. Elias noted with unease that they spent nearly 2 days alone with the body before permitting burial. In the weeks following their mother's funeral, Elias observed a disturbing change in his daughter's behavior. They began setting a place for their mother at the dinner table each night, placing fresh food before the empty chair, and engaging in one-sided conversations as if she were still present. Initially, Elias attributed this behavior to the natural grieving process, but as months passed and the ritual continued unabated, his concern grew. A letter from Elias to his brother, dated June 1881, expresses this concern explicitly. The girls have not accepted their mother's passing. Each evening grows more elaborate than the last. Now they claim they can sense her presence at the table, that she communicates with them through subtle means, a change in temperature, the flicker of a candle flame. I fear for their sanity, yet when I suggest they speak with Reverend Harding, they regard me with such cold disdain that I dare not press the matter. It was against this backdrop that Evelyn's engagement to Dr. Calvin Whitmore began and ended. Medical school records show that Whitmore had been pursuing research into experimental preservation techniques, making him an object of intense interest to Evelyn. Their courtship was brief, and according to society columns of the time, their engagement announcement came as a surprise to Salem's upper circles. What few knew was that Evelyn had been corresponding with Whitmore about his research for months before they ever met in person. These letters, discovered in a locked drawer in Whitmore's former office in Boston, revealed that Evelyn had presented herself as a patron interested in funding his studies, particularly those related to the preservation of organic material outside its natural environment. Whitmore's early letters show enthusiasm for finding a benefactor who understood the importance of his work. Later correspondence, however, reveals growing unease as Evelyn's inquiries became increasingly specific about techniques that had little medical application but significant implications for her own mysterious pursuits. The breaking point, according to a draft of a letter never sent, came when Whitmore visited the Towne residence and discovered what he described as a workshop that would make the alchemists of old shudder with revulsion. He wrote, "The specimens, the notes, the drawings, all indicate an obsession that goes beyond scientific inquiry into the realm of the profane. I cannot, in good conscience, continue this association, much less a marital union." After the broken engagement, the sisters withdrew further from society. Their father, Elias Towne, died in 1888 under what the local newspaper described as unremarkable circumstances. The official cause was listed as heart failure, a common diagnosis for the era. What remained unmentioned was that Elias had begun consulting with a lawyer about potentially having his daughters committed to an asylum, as revealed in correspondence found among the lawyer's archived files. Following their father's death, the sisters became even more reclusive. Tax records show that they gradually dismissed most of the household staff, retaining only a cook who came 3 times a week and a groundskeeper who was permitted to tend only to the front yard, visible from the street. Both employees reported that they were forbidden from entering certain areas of the house, particularly the basement and the formal dining room. The cook, Harriet Sullivan, provided a statement to investigators after the case became public, recalling that she had been instructed to prepare meals for 12 people every Wednesday evening, despite knowing that the sisters lived alone. When she once inquired about the apparent waste of food, Eleanor had replied, "Nothing is wasted. Our guests are merely, discreet in their consumption." Sullivan also noted that after preparing these meals, she was dismissed early and paid handsomely for her discretion. She admitted to occasionally observing through windows as she left, witnessing the sisters meticulously arranging the dining room, placing name cards and lighting candles before closing the curtains. They moved with the precision of actresses who had rehearsed the same play hundreds of times, she stated. The groundskeeper, Frederick Winters, provided additional insights into the sisters' increasing eccentricities. He recalled being asked to deliver packages that arrived by mail directly to the basement door rather than the main entrance. These packages, he noted, often bore stamps from chemical supply companies or came from university research departments. Winters also mentioned that beginning around 1900, he was instructed to dig small holes in the garden at irregular intervals, into which the sisters would place sealed metal containers. He was forbidden from asking about the contents and was paid extra to forget these unusual requests. When investigators excavated these sites in 1912, they discovered containers holding soil samples mixed with unusual residues that forensic analysts declined to specifically identify in their official reports. The investigation might have taken yet another turn had authorities connected the Towne case to a series of unusual disturbances reported in Salem and neighboring towns between 1888 and 1910. These incidents, documented in police records but never solved, involved reports of unusual nighttime activities in local cemeteries, with evidence of visitation to certain graves. At the time, these incidents were attributed to medical students or to practitioners of folk rituals. No connection was made to the respectable Towne sisters, whose public appearances had become so rare that many younger Salem residents knew them only by reputation. What is particularly disturbing about the dinner ritual practiced by the sisters is how it evolved over time. Early entries in Eleanor's notebooks describe simple place settings for their deceased mother, with observations about perceived temperature changes or candle movements that they interpreted as communication. Later entries, following their father's death, show a shift toward more elaborate preparations, including specific foods that the deceased had favored in life. By 1890, the notebooks detail the addition of essences, apparently chemical compounds of their own devising, to the meals, which they believed would strengthen the connection between the living and the dead. The first mention of physical anchors appears in an 1895 entry, coinciding with the earliest cemetery disturbances reported in Salem. Eleanor wrote, "He has determined that the connection requires a physical conduit. The essence alone is insufficient. Something of the original vessel must be present to guide the consciousness back to our table." The subsequent entries chronicle increasingly complex chemical experiments, with detailed notes on preservation techniques and references to obscure texts on Egyptian, Tibetan, and Central American preservation practices. The sisters appeared to be developing their own syncretic approach, combining elements from various traditions with modern chemical knowledge. What remains unclear is whether the sisters believed they were actually reviving the dead or merely preserving some essence of consciousness that could be invited to their macabre gatherings. Their writings suggest a blurring of this distinction over time, as if the ritual itself had become more important than its original purpose. By 1910, Eleanor's notebooks had taken on an almost liturgical quality, with precise instructions for each step of the dinner ceremony. The meal itself was secondary to the ritualistic aspects, the lighting of specific candles in a particular order, the recitation of what they called invitations, which resembled poetic eulogies more than traditional dinner invitations, and the placement of the preserved anchors in proximity to each guest's setting. The discovery that truly disturbed investigators came from a comparison of Towne death records with the sisters' dinner logs, In at least 3 cases, the sisters had set a place for individuals before their deaths had occurred or been publicly announced. In one instance, a place had been prepared for Judge Harrison Putnam 3 days before he succumbed to a sudden stroke, a death that came as a shock to the community, as he had been in apparently good health. This coincidence led some investigators to speculate darkly about whether the sisters' activities had extended beyond mere posthumous rituals into something more proactive. However, no evidence was ever found to suggest that the Towne sisters had directly caused any deaths, and this line of inquiry was eventually abandoned as superstitious thinking. The dinner party discovered by Officer Jennings in December 1912 appears to have been the culmination of the sisters' decades-long pursuit. Eleanor's final notebook entry, dated the day before their discovery, contains a passage that has puzzled researchers ever since. Tonight, the circle will be complete. The doctor has provided the final key, unwittingly perhaps, but provided nonetheless. When 12 become 1 and 1 becomes 12, the boundary dissolves. We will dine together, not in memory or in essence, but in truth. The exact meaning of this passage remains unclear. Some have interpreted it as evidence that the sisters had descended completely into shared delusion. Others, noting the methodical nature of their other writings, suggest it may have referred to some specific aspect of their chemical experiments that they believed would yield a breakthrough. What is certain is that, following their commitment to the sanatorium, both sisters displayed a remarkable change in demeanor. The attending physician noted that while they remained largely nonverbal, they appeared contentedly expectant, as if waiting for something they were certain would occur. They no longer seemed disturbed by their separation from the Towne residence, nor did they resist their confinement. The most unusual aspect of their behavior was the nightly ritual that began precisely at 7 o'clock, when both women would suddenly animate, moving in perfect synchronization as they pantomimed the serving of a formal dinner. The physician's notes describe how they would appear to pour wine, serve food, and engage in silent conversation with empty chairs, their expressions shifting naturally as if responding to statements only they could hear. One attendant reported that during these episodes, the temperature in the sisters' room would drop noticeably, sometimes causing water in drinking glasses to develop a thin layer of ice despite the warmth of the building. Another claimed to have heard faint voices and the tinkling of silverware against china, though no physical evidence of these phenomena was ever documented officially. In January 1914, a fire consumed the Towne residence. The cause was officially recorded as electrical failure, though the house had been disconnected from utilities months earlier. Witnesses reported that the blaze began simultaneously in multiple parts of the structure, with flames of unusual colors, blues and greens that suggested the presence of chemical accelerants. Most disturbing was the report from the fire chief, who claimed that as the house burned, he and several of his men distinctly heard what sounded like multiple voices raised in conversation, followed by laughter, emanating from the dining room, which by then was fully engulfed in flames. The chief later retracted this statement, attributing it to the disorienting effects of smoke and exhaustion. Following the fire, there was a marked change in the sisters' behavior at the sanatorium. They ceased their nightly dinner ritual and became even more withdrawn. The attending physician noted that they now spent hours staring out their window toward Boston, in the general direction of where Salem would be, with expressions he described as mournful, yet somehow satisfied. In the weeks before their deaths in early 1915, both women began sleeping more, becoming increasingly difficult to rouse for meals or examinations. The physician's notes indicate that they would often be found having positioned themselves in their beds in the manner of the deceased laid out for viewing, arms crossed over their chests, eyes closed, with slight, enigmatic smiles on their faces. Eleanor died first, on February 12, 1915. The cause was recorded simply as natural causes, though the physician noted that there were no obvious signs of illness or deterioration beyond her general frailty. Evelyn, upon being informed of her sister's passing, showed no visible reaction. She simply nodded once and returned to gazing out the window. 3 days later, on February 15th, attendants found Evelyn in the same position, having apparently died in her sleep. The physician who examined her body noted 2 unusual details in his private journal, though these observations were omitted from the official death certificate. First, that rigor mortis appeared to have set in with unusual rapidity, and second, that her body was positioned exactly as Eleanor's had been, down to the angle of her crossed hands. The sisters were buried together in the Towne family plot in Salem, as stipulated in their will. The funeral was sparsely attended, primarily by officials involved in the case, and a few distant relatives who had traveled from other states, more out of curiosity than grief. What few know is that the night following their burial, the caretaker of the cemetery reported hearing voices from the vicinity of the Towne plot. When he investigated, he found nothing amiss, but noted in his log that the air around the fresh grave felt wrong, heavy and sharp, like the air before a lightning strike. He requested reassignment to a different section of the cemetery the following day. In the years that followed, the Towne case gradually faded from public memory. The property where their house once stood remained undeveloped until 1930, when it was purchased by the city and converted into a small public park. Workers excavating for the foundation of a gazebo reportedly uncovered a sealed metal box containing 12 silver spoons, each engraved with a name that matched the Towne sisters' guest list. According to maintenance records, these items were reburied at the request of the mayor, who feared their discovery might revive unwelcome memories. The most comprehensive analysis of the case was undertaken in 1950 by Dr. Margaret Halsey, a psychologist with an interest in shared psychosis. After reviewing all available records, Halsey proposed that the Towne sisters had developed a folie à deux, a shared delusional disorder following their mother's death. Their isolation, combined with possible exposure to toxic chemicals used in their experiments, had created a self-reinforcing system of beliefs that grew more elaborate over decades. Halsey's report, while clinically detached, contains one notable passage. What makes the Towne case remarkable is not the delusion itself, but the sisters' absolute commitment to its physical manifestation. They did not merely believe their dinner guests were present. They created an entire sensory environment to support this belief, from the place settings to the chemical preservatives to the physical anchors. In a perverse way, there is something almost admirable in the thoroughness of their approach, as if through sheer force of will and meticulous attention to detail, they sought to bend reality to accommodate their refusal to accept loss. What Halsey's report does not address, perhaps because the records were sealed or destroyed, are the unusual phenomena reported around the Towne sisters both before and after their deaths. These accounts, preserved primarily in personal journals and private correspondence rather than official documents, suggest dimensions to the case that resist rational explanation. Martha Prescott, who served briefly as a housemaid for the Towne family in 1882, shortly after Mary Ann Towne's death, wrote in a letter to her sister, "The oddest thing occurs each Wednesday evening. The sisters insist that I depart by 6, but from the road I have observed the dining room windows. Though I know only the 2 sisters remain in that great house, I have counted 5 distinct shadows moving about the table." When I mentioned this casually to Miss Eleanor, suggesting that perhaps they had guests I was unaware of, she looked at me with such intensity that I felt a physical chill and said, "You can see them too, then? How remarkable!" I gave my notice the following day. Similarly, a delivery boy named Thomas Greer, who brought parcels to the Towne residence in the late 1890s, recorded in his childhood diary a strange experience. "When Miss Evelyn opened the door today, I felt a rush of cold air from inside, though the day was warm. As I handed over the package, I heard what sounded like many people talking at once, though their voices were thin, like when you hear conversation through a thick wall. When I asked if they had company, Miss Evelyn smiled in a way that made my stomach turn and said, "We always have company for dinner, young man. Always the same guests, year after year. They never disappoint us by declining our invitation." I ran all the way back to the store and begged Mr. Finch never to send me there again. Perhaps most unsettling are the observations recorded by Dr. Samuel Cartwright, the physician who attended the sisters at the sanatorium. In his private journal, separate from the official medical records, he wrote, "I am a man of science, not given to flights of fancy, yet I cannot explain what I witnessed this evening. During the sisters' usual dinner pantomime, I distinctly saw, or thought I saw, faint outlines of figures seated in the chairs they address. These appearances were transparent, like heat shimmer above a summer road, yet they held definite human forms. When I blinked or tried to focus directly on any single figure, it would vanish, yet remain visible in my peripheral vision. I have tested my eyesight and found no deficiencies. I have reduced my evening brandy. Still, each night at 7, the phenomenon repeats. I find myself increasingly reluctant to enter their room at that hour. These accounts, while compelling, can be dismissed as the product of suggestion, imagination, or simple fabrication. More difficult to explain are the physical anomalies documented in relation to the case. The chemical analysis of substances found in the Towne basement, conducted by a professor from Harvard University, yielded results that the professor himself described as inconsistent with known chemical properties. Several compounds defied identification, while others exhibited unexpected reactions during testing. The professor's notes indicate particular interest in a viscous amber liquid found in 12 sealed vials, each bearing a dinner guest's name. When minute amounts of this substance were introduced to organic material, the organic material exhibited what the professor termed unusual preservation properties and peculiar reactivity. The complete results of this analysis were never published. The professor requested that all samples be destroyed following testing and reportedly resigned his position at the university shortly thereafter, relocating to Switzerland, where he lived in relative seclusion until his death in 1937. Another physical anomaly concerns the dinner table itself, which was removed from the Towne residence and stored as evidence in the basement of the Salem courthouse. According to maintenance records, the table exhibited unusual properties. It remained cool to the touch even in hot weather, and objects placed upon it, particularly food items, deteriorated at a markedly slower rate than expected. After several courthouse employees refused to enter the storage room where it was kept, claiming to hear whispering voices and the sounds of silverware whenever they approached, the table was moved to a secure location outside of Salem. Its ultimate fate is unrecorded in available documents. Perhaps the most rational explanation for the Towne case lies in the chemical exposure theory. Many of the compounds used in early photography and experimental preservation techniques contained mercury, arsenic, and various acids that, with prolonged exposure, could cause neurological damage, hallucinations, and paranoia. The sisters' decades-long work with these substances, often in the poorly ventilated basement of their home, would certainly have exposed them to toxic levels. This theory is supported by the medical examiner's findings during the autopsy of both sisters, which revealed elevated levels of heavy metals in their tissues. It would explain the progressively more elaborate nature of their delusion over time, as continued exposure exacerbated their condition. Yet this explanation, satisfying as it might be from a scientific perspective, fails to account for certain aspects of the case, particularly the precise and coordinated nature of their activities, which suggests a level of rationality and planning that seems inconsistent with severe mercury poisoning. Moreover, it does not address the reports of unusual phenomena witnessed by multiple unconnected individuals, both at the Towne residence and later at the sanatorium and cemetery. What, then, are we to make of the Towne sisters and their ghastly guest list? Were they simply two mentally ill women whose delusions were enhanced by chemical exposure? Were they practicing some form of displaced grief that evolved into elaborate ritual? Or had they, as their writings suggest they believed, discovered some method of preserving and calling back what they termed the essential nature of those who had passed? Science, of course, dismisses this last possibility. The dead do not return to dine, regardless of how elaborately one sets the table. Yet in the words of Eleanor Towne, found in one of her earliest notebooks, absence is merely a failure of perception. Those who are gone remain in ways we have been taught not to see, or hear, or feel. Our task is not to bring them back, for they have never truly left, but to attune ourselves to their continued presence. In a final strange coda to the case, when the Towne family plot was relocated during a cemetery expansion in 1941, workers made a disturbing discovery. Though funeral records clearly indicated that both sisters had been buried in the plot in 1915, upon examination of the site, only one coffin was found to contain remains. The other, and records are unclear as to whether it was Evelyn's or Eleanor's, was completely empty, with no sign that it had ever contained anything at all. The cemetery administrator, clearly disturbed by this finding, ordered the matter hushed up. Both coffins were reburied in the new location, and no official investigation was conducted. In his private correspondence, however, the administrator wrote to a colleague, "I cannot account for what we found, or rather, did not find." The casket was intact, the seal unbroken. It is as if one sister simply vanished, leaving not so much as a trace of dust behind. Or perhaps, though I hesitate even to suggest it, she was never there at all. Some longtime Salem residents maintain that on certain autumn evenings, particularly as the sun sets, a faint light can be seen moving from room to room in the park where the townhouse once stood, as if someone were lighting lamps for expected guests. Others claim that passing the location at precisely 7 o'clock, one can hear the distant sounds of a dinner party in progress, gentle conversation, the clink of fine china, occasional laughter. These stories are easily dismissed as urban legends, the kind that inevitably accumulate around any location associated with tragic or unsettling events. Yet they persist, passed from one generation to the next, maintaining the memory of the Towne sisters and their eternal dinner party long after the official records have been sealed and forgotten. Perhaps the most unsettling suggestion comes from Eleanor's final notebook, in a passage that investigators initially overlooked due to its placement on what appeared to be a blank page. Written in a nearly invisible ink that only became legible when the page was accidentally exposed to chemical vapors during analysis, the message reads, "We do not cease, we continue. The empty chair awaits you. The invitation, once extended, cannot be withdrawn. Sooner or later, we all come to the table." Salem Towne records indicate that over the decades following the Towne case, several individuals connected with the investigation, Officer Jennings, the Harvard professor who analyzed the compounds, two cemetery workers involved in the sisters' burial, and the court clerk who cataloged the evidence, all reported experiencing the same dream. They found themselves approaching a grand Victorian house at dusk, drawn by warm light spilling from its windows and the sounds of a lively dinner party within. In the dream, they would reach the front door, which would open to reveal Evelyn Towne, elegantly dressed as if for a formal occasion, who would smile and say, "We've been expecting you. Your place is waiting." Each of these individuals died within a year of reporting the dream. The Towne case remains in many ways an enigma, a story of grief and obsession that may have transcended the boundaries of life and death, or may simply illustrate the terrible power of shared delusion. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, in that shadowy realm where the rational mind confronts phenomena it cannot fully explain. What is certain is that the Towne sisters believed absolutely in what they were doing. Their meticulous records, their carefully preserved anchors, their elaborate dinner rituals all speak to a conviction that transcended mere madness. They were, in their own disturbing way, scientists of a sort, testing the limits of a hypothesis that most would dismiss as impossible, that consciousness persists, that absence can be overcome, that with the right invitation and preparation, even death might not represent an insurmountable barrier to joining one for dinner. As we conclude this account of one of Salem's most disturbing cases, it seems appropriate to consider Eleanor Towne's final written words, found scratched into the wall behind her bed at the sanatorium, discovered only after her death. The table is set. The guests arrive. Time is irrelevant. We dine together, as we always have, as we always will. The circle closes. The meal never ends. Whether this represents the final delusion of a disturbed mind or something more, a glimpse of some terrible truth that perhaps we are better off not knowing, is a question each listener must answer for themselves. But perhaps the next time you sit down to dinner and sense a subtle draft, or glimpse what seems to be a shadow without a source, or hear what sounds like the faint ring of crystal from an empty corner of the room, you might pause to consider, whose table are you really sitting at, and who, unseen but present, might be dining with you?